report. This is now 300 different projects that don't match with common sense. We've also heard the criticism with each of the reports that we've put out that some of them are a little bit nitpicking. I think the people in America who read this report, who actually get a C, who have some common sense, will raise the question: if we're going to have a stimulus bill, it ought to be truly about stimulating the economy. It ought to be creating real jobs, and it ought to be doing the thing that gives us the best bang for our buck. There is no question this stimulus bill has had a positive effect on the economy to a certain degree, and what our criticism is, it could have had a far greater effect. When the special IG for this admits that there's going to be $50 billion in fraud out of this bill, and that we highlight things that we think are stupid and inappropriate, it is normal that we're going to get criticism. This is not directed towards the president or the vice president, but it's towards the process that has gotten us $13.3 trillion in debt, and the continuing example of process that we see every day that creates inappropriateness and does not give us a benefit for the taxpayers' dollars. And I would just add, it's not the taxpayers' dollars. It's their grandkids' dollars. And when we steal future from generations that follow us, may be a time when we need to do that, but when we do it, there is no time in which we should be doing it in a way that's less than the most efficient and most effective way for the citizens of this country. Senator McCain.
Well, I'm pleased to join Senator Coburn, Dr. Coburn again, in bringing to the attention of the American people the really waste and mismanagement of their taxpayers' dollars. It was originally $787 billion. It ballooned to $862 billion. And I think it's important that we discuss this in the backdrop that we were absolutely assured that if this stimulus package passed, unemployment would be at 8%. American people are disappointed, but many of us are not surprised. Meanwhile, the national debt has skyrocketed from $10.8 trillion to $13.2 trillion, a 23% rise. I opposed the stimulus package because I thought it was a spending bill that was mortgaging our children and our grandchildren. We did have a reasonable alternative for about half the money that would have forced the spending to stop, for unobligated funding to return to the taxpayers after 2 consecutive quarters of economic growth greater than 2% of inflation. I think it's very timely that this report be given to the American people, particularly since the administration embarked upon a 6-week summer of recovery tour. That's why we've titled our report Summertime Blues. And the American people have the summertime blues, as unemployment is at 9.5%. Over half the homes or nearly half the homes in my home state of Arizona are still underwater, and we have seen a decline in the gross domestic product that indicates that we're in for a long, difficult year of high unemployment. And instead of recovering, this economy is stagnating, and we have just exacerbated our children and grandchildren's future by laying another $1 trillion worth of debt on them. And these examples of the 100 that we have, there are hundreds of others. These are just the ones that we have uncovered. $1.7 billion is a lot of money anywhere but our nation's capital.
Yeah, we have a total now of 300 projects over $15 billion. You could debate some of them, but could we have used that $15 billion in a way that would have given us a greater economic return, a greater multiplier effect, and actually had greater impact on the country? I think so. So with that, we'll take your questions.
Okay, let me just make one other point. Of course, the recipients of these taxpayers' dollars will complain and justify the reasons for them receiving these funds. The question should be posed: how many jobs does it create? And obviously, with these projects, little or none. Go ahead.
Arizona Sheriff Paul Babu, in reference to the DOJ lawsuit against the state's new immigration law, said that our government has become our enemy and is taking us to court at a time when we need help. Do you agree, Mr. Sheriff?
Let's go there.
I respect and admire Paul Babu. He is deeply concerned because the county in which Paul Babu's areas to maintain law and order in Pinal County has become a funnel for human smuggling and drug smuggling. And he obviously has not received the help from the federal government that he thinks he needs. And that is to get our border secure. And the latest iteration, of course, is Americans were told August 1st that we will be having these 524 at the border, and obviously nobody showed up at the border. Another example of the administration's rhetoric not being matched by action. So Paul Babu is one of the most admired lawmen in our state of Arizona. He is frustrated, as is Larry Deaver down in Cochise County, and all of the others who have to put up with and cope with the consequences of an insecure border.
Okay.
Yeah.
I have a question for both of you on two different topics. The first on this that you're talking about. President Obama is trying out a message on you. In fact, we've heard it several times now that that you are the ones with President Bush that drove the car into the ditch, and you're asking for the keys back in this election. So I wonder if both of you would respond to that, and then I have a second question on another topic.
Sure. I opposed the spending. I went to the floor every day and fought against it and said that we had to get spending under control. And the voters punished Republicans in 2006 and 2008. I would remind you that there were Democrats in charge of Congress beginning in 2007, for one thing. Number two is that George Bush looks like a piker compared to what has taken place since President Obama has come into the presidency. Look, he can keep beating BIOB, no matter what it is, blame it on Bush. He can keep that up. The American people are going to hold him accountable this November, not an administration that went out of power over a year and a half ago.
There's plenty of blame for everybody in Washington about where we find ourselves. The fact is what the American people have done is awakened to the incompetency of Washington. And what they'd like to see is a growing, vibrant economy based on a limited government, a true entrepreneurial free enterprise system, and a tax structure that creates opportunity and greatness and economic well-being for our kids. I don't care whose label you put on it. When $350 billion a year of their taxpayer money is absolutely wasted through either fraud, abuse, or duplication, that's a pox on both parties. And I don't think the American people want to hear blame. What they want to hear is ideas. How do we get the economy going? How do we bring foreign investment to this country to create jobs? How do we have a tax structure that's equitable to all but does not punish the entrepreneurial spirit and rewards risk-taking, that has a limited federal government and a role that's limited so that the very freedom and liberty that was created for us can be manifested in terms of a greater standard of living? I think it's the same old Washington chatter. The fact is America wants to hear how do we get out of our problems, not who's pointing fingers at who created them. And when you have those kind of statements coming from the president, it's not, first of all, it's not leadership. It's looking backwards. And it's partisanship and politics. And people want policy and freedom and progress. They don't want the same old thing that Washington keeps offering up.
And separately, I know each of you have separate disagreements with the Clapper nomination. You're holding it up. I don't know if Senator McCain, you've worked yours out, but I wonder if you
I have not formally held a hold on his nomination. I think the press is in error on that. I think it's important that we look at the vast number of people who've been released under both the Bush administration and the Obama administration who are now from Guantanamo, who are now trying to kill American soldiers. And I think that information is due the Intelligence Committee, and we ought to be getting it. And so I'm trying to use whatever I can for us to make good decisions. We shouldn't release another person who wants to kill Americans out of Guantanamo and put them back on the battlefield against us when they're being held by us today under correct international law.
I was told that I would receive that information yesterday and then this morning and now supposedly by noon. It's not a small matter. It's a $9 billion program that I'm talking about, and all I've asked for is information that I was promised well over a year and a half ago.
Senators, if I could ask both of you, Senator Graham, as you may know, is proposing changes to the 14th Amendment of the Constitution so that children born here of illegal parents cannot be granted.
Can I stop for a minute? This is a press conference that we've called to talk about wasteful spending in the stimulus. I'll be happy to talk with you at a different time. Let's use this press conference to talk about the waste, the fact that we're not accomplishing what we want through the stimulus package, rather than to talk on all these other issues. I'll be happy to be available to you and answer those questions at another time. You bet, you bet. But let's talk about, you know, putting windows in a building that's been closed for 3 years that isn't really going to be reopened at Mount St. Helens. I mean, is that really a smart way for us to spend money? I mean, go through this project. Do they really fit with common sense? Is if you ask 100 Americans what would be a better way to spend this money, couldn't they give us a better way that would actually create real jobs, an economic multiplier of 1.9 or 2 rather than a 1.1, and actually give us something of value that we're going to use in the future? I mean, that's what we ought to be concerned about. And the reason this report is important is because the rest of the federal government's filled with stuff just like this. What the American people would like to see is oversight, where we're actually doing our job to see how we're spending their money and their kids' money is actually making a difference. Except Congress doesn't want to do oversight.
Ditto. Ditto.
Yes, sir.
Let me ask you about the Tucson project that's in here, $314,000 to study the Big Bang. I mean, is that unworthy? Is that what you're saying?
It's unworthy in the respect that it does not create jobs. The stimulus package was supposed to create jobs. Unemployment was going to be 8%. That's what the president said. That's what his chief economic advisor said. That's what the Secretary of Treasury said when they sold this debt to the American people. It does not create jobs. And as I said at the beginning of our conversation, every one of these grant recipients, whether they be the Park Service that we're replacing windows in closed facilities, or whether it be in a study of exotic ants, will all say this is a worthwhile project. It was supposed to create jobs. It does not.
Senator Coburn, you opened by saying that you thought there's no question the stimulus had had a positive effect on the economy. Can you elaborate on that and say whether that positive effect might outweigh some of the things pointing out in this report?
Well, look, anytime you spend $600 billion in a $13 trillion, you're going to have a positive effect because you're putting that money into the economy. It's had a positive effect in terms of people keeping their jobs that work for state governments and local governments. But the question is could we have had a more positive effect? And that was the problem with this stimulus from the get-go. That's the problem with these programs. If you spend $300,000 in Tucson, could you have spent that money and created more jobs and created something of real value? For example, as we wind down from Iraq, what's going to be the requirement to reset our military? It's going to be big. If, in fact, we had put more money into the resetting of the military, you would have created tons more jobs, buying things that you're going to have to buy anyway at a lower price than what we're going to pay for them in the future, and jobs that would have had tremendous multiplier effect. So we can study in Tucson, or we can create something that we're going to have, create a stimulus program that's going to buy something that we're going to buy anyway, and we can move forward those jobs to today and actually create multiplier effect on jobs. The other thing is Would you think that we ought to take, the oil companies just released their profits, and we're putting $300 million, maybe 100.5 of that is actual federal taxpayer dollars so far, into a power plant in California that's going to be owned by one of the large oil companies? Did we create? It's not even going to be started to be built till 2014. So we've created 140 jobs at $100,000 a job, and haven't gotten anything right now out of it. Out of $150 million that's already gone to it. The question is not whether these projects can have some impact. The question the American people would like to have answered is, are you directing the money in a way to have the maximum impact when we have a 9.5 going to 10% unemployment rate? And I think that's a legitimate question. And do they meet the common sense test? And too many of them don't. And it's a hard job what we're asking them to do. But they strapped their ankles together when they started out because they directed it in a way that is not going to be as beneficial for the country as it could have been.
Could I just point out again, they're bound to have had, when you spend this much money, some jobs created. But what's the price we have paid for future generations of Americans? A $1.1 trillion additional debt. That, in my view, overwhelmingly negates any, quote, positive effects that it may have had in the short term. And finally, again, we did have a proposal. I proposed it, an alternative. It would have created jobs. It would have cut taxes. It would have encouraged small businesses. And we realized that we had to stimulate the economy, but not the way this package did. Thank you all very much. Thank you. Okay, wait, yeah, go ahead.
Senator McCain, I also have a question on the 14th Amendment. Senators
We're talking about the stimulus right on this waste. Thanks very much.